This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Hello, hello.
Howdy. We're back.
Welcome to Dream Idiots as we charge along in the wonderful year of 2024 where nothing bad will happen and all will be sunshine and roses.
Yeah, I applaud your optimism. I don't
Uh,
share
the,
it, but I applaud it.
the non-sharing, non-optimistic guy is Bryan. My name is Morris. Each week we tell each other stories and we bring you along for the ride. And you can find us in a variety of places. And I think we've been getting some more emails and stuff from folks. Bryan, is that the case?
We have indeed got a small collection of story ideas folks have been writing in and sharing. You can drop us a line if you want at Dream Idiots Podcast at Gmail. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Dream Idiots. We're on pretty much every single podcast platform out there. So if you want to like and share and subscribe, pass us along to your friends, that would be great. Give us 5 stars and shoot us a review. That'd be hugely helpful. It helps us climb the charts. Apparently, that's how the algorithms allegedly work. And if you want to as well, you can actually join our Patreon. We're not gonna filter out folks from seeing our stuff on Patreon at this point. So you can actually join on Patreon for free to get the audio content. Patreon.com/Dream Idiots is kind of the easiest and maybe best way to find our stuff. But we appreciate all that, and thanks for hanging in there with us.
Yes, indeed. We don't have any announcements this go around, I don't think.
Correct?
Bryan, you sound great and fully recovered from your latest dance with COVID. You look good. You've got sunshine on your cheeks and a rosy forehead, and you look fantastic. So,
Well,
shall
I
we
try.
get started?
Let's go.
Okay, I get to go first. Episode 102. Bryan, like a lot of great stories and some not so great stories, I'm going to start this one in Canada, but it's going to end up someplace very different. I would like to talk about the mid 1950s in Canada with two fellows by the name of John Aylesworth and Frank Pepiot. Two
Okay.
very Canadian sounding names. And they had successful solo careers as television producers and writers in their homeland of Canada. And they also performed as a comedy team and had a knack for putting together comedy variety programs. They were a big hit with a Canadian broadcasting company and worked on such programs, which I've never seen, but programs titled After Hours, The Big Review, and On Stage, with or without Margaret Stanley. Aylesworth created a current events program on his own, a quiz show, and this sounds kind of like maybe Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, current events program called Front Page Challenge that lasted an astonishing amount of time from 1957 to 1995 on the CBC.
Wow.
So yeah, that's pretty good for a current events quiz show. Like all good nuts that eventually rolled downhill, the pair moved to the US in 1958. Over the years, as a team or individually, they worked on an impressive amount of television programs as producers or writers. The Andy Williams Show, and I know we've got a big fan of Andy Williams in San Antonio. Joe's a big Andy Williams fan. The Jimmy Dean Show, Kraft Music Hall, The Judy Garland Show, Your Hit Parade, The Julie Andrews Hour, and The Sonny and Cher Show. And all of those kind of fall in line with what they're known for, the comedy, variety, special stuff. They picked up a few Emmys along the way as well. The Jimmy Dean Show is a perfect example of a variety show from the 1950s and the 60s as well, with musical guests, comedians, and other creative appearances which filled the program. In 1963, a certain brown puppet dog named Rolf and his buddy Jim Henson made their first TV appearance on the Jimmy
Wow.
Dean Show. Fred Flintstone showed up as a guest. Jimmy Dean was a great host, being a country singer and actor himself, but the show lacked a rural feel despite frequent country music guests. Aylesworth and Pepiot filed this observation away for future plans. And this is the same Jimmy Dean who was also the sausage maker.
That's what I
Yeah.
assumed.
Actor, singer, sausage maker, Jimmy Dean. The pair also enjoyed, and I think you're a fan, the comedy stylings of Jonathan Winters,
Uh-huh.
particularly the old-time country banter between the host and comedian Charlie Weaver. Weaver later appeared on the Hollywood Squares in the lower left corner, always wearing his crushed black hat and tiny little glasses. You can find some of his footage on YouTube, and he is hilarious. He's one of those dirty comedians that doesn't sound quite dirty. Peter Marshall, for example, asks how many balls are on a standard billiards table, and Charlie replies, "I don't know how many fellers are playing." So you can imagine a Hollywood Square layout that had both him and Paul Lynde in it at the same time. Alongside the country music of the Jimmy Dean Show and the country-influenced humors of Winters and Weaver, the immigrant Canadian writers noticed the popularity of rural-themed television programs such as The Andy Griffith Show, The Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, Green Acres, and Gomer Pyle USMC. They also admired the style of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Ellsworth and Pepiot stopped wondering why no one had created a country-themed musical comedy variety program for American television. Instead, they went ahead and just created one for the 1969 broadcast season, and it debuted in June of that year. Bryan, you know what the name of the show was?
Well, I was you mentioned Laugh-In. I was assuming it was Laugh-In, but it must not be. No.
No,
Hee
Bryan, they're
Hee Haw.
Hee Haw. Hee Haw. In 1969, their creation, Hee Haw, hit the airwaves. Hee Haw, for those who won't, can't, or don't want to remember it, or never watched it, was indeed a country-themed musical comedy variety program. The hosts were Roy Clark and Buck Owens, two extremely talented musicians, something which often gets lost when discussing Hee Haw. Roy Clark, for example, his parents were amateur musicians, his mother playing piano and his father guitar, banjo, and fiddle. Clark himself started off playing a 4-string cigar box modified with a ukulele neck as an elementary school student. Moving from rural Virginia to Washington, D.C. during the Great Depression, Clark stood out amongst his classmates for his love of country music. But he continued learning and by age 14 could play the guitar, the banjo, and the mandolin. He won back-to-back national banjo championships in 1947 and 1948. Say what you want about the banjo, but I've never done that. That's pretty impressive. He debuted on local television there in the Washington, D.C. area in 1949 at the age of 16. At 17, he made the big debut that all country musicians want to make at the Grand Ole Opry in recognition of his banjo talents. He played with David Stringbean Aikman, Red Foley, and even Ernest Tubb. He landed a job with the aforementioned Jimmy Dean. He played in Vegas. He was part of Wanda Jackson's backing band. And then there's his TV appearances. He popped up on The Tonight Show during the Jack Paar years, and again during the first season of Johnny Carson as host. He dropped in on the Jackie Gleason Show. He even played dual guest roles on a few episodes of Beverly Hillbillies as Cousin Roy Halsey and Mother Myrtle Halsey. Roy Clark was almost everywhere. And then there's Buck Owens. The self-taught musician played guitar, mandolin, horns, and drums. His first electric steel guitar used an old radio that his father had converted into an amplifier. He partnered up with guitarist Don Rich and formed Buck Owens and his Buckaroos, and at the same time created a new country style, the Bakersfield Sound, full of twangy electric guitars, high harmonies, and a snappy rhythm. Plus, those suits. Do you remember the suits that the Buckaroos used to wear? Those beautiful rhinestone-studded nudie suits crafted by Ukrainian-born Nuta Kolyenko, better known as Nudie Cone. The Buckaroos toured the U.S., Japan. They played the White House for LBJ. They recorded a very famous Carnegie Hall album. And in my household growing up, we had a much-loved and well-worn copy of the 1969 Buck Owens album, Tall Dark Stranger, in its record collection. Buck was at the height of his powers when he accepted hosting duties of Hee Haw along with Roy Clark. The Buckaroos served as the house band. So what gets lost here is that there's a real connection between the Grand Ole Opry and very talented musicians on Hee Haw. The rest of the cast featured country stars familiar to audience members who followed country musicians and comedians. If not, they still served as recognizable characters. Grandpa Jones, Lulu Roman, Junior Samples, Archie Campbell, David Stringbean Aikman, I mentioned him before, Minnie Pearl, George Goober Lindsay, and Tennessee Ernie Ford were all on board at one time or another. Plus, there were the Hee Haw Honeys, a group of beautiful young women in cut-off jeans and shirts knotted at the waist, sort of a Daisy May from Little Abner come to life, precursors to the Daisy Duke look.
Right.
Bryan, I'm going to stop here for a moment. Did you watch a lot of Hee Haw as a kid? I'm guessing you didn't.
I did not, a tiny bit. No, but not much.
You probably remember the sketches more than anything else.
Hmm.
There were 50 different sketches that rotated throughout the show. They would appear repeatedly throughout the years. Some came and went as performers departed, but several were mainstays, such as the cornfield gag, where cast members would pop up out of the cornfield and tell awful jokes. David Stringbean Aikman played the Scarecrow in early seasons. This was clearly a swipe of the joke wall from Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. One recurring bit, which stands out in my memory, and really what started this all off is Keith Olbermann mentioned this on his podcast earlier last year, sometime in December, I think. The "Where Are You Tonight" duet. Do you remember this part?
No, not at all.
So this initially featured singer comedian Archie Campbell, and he'd be facing the audience holding a scythe, and he was singing the lyrics to "Where Are You Tonight," and Gordy Tapp would be holding a pitchfork with his back to the camera. At Campbell's cue, Tapp would spin around and join in for the chorus. So he would sing some lyrics that were altered with a punchline joke to it. He would hit Tapp, Tapp would turn around, and they would sing, "Where, oh, where are you tonight? Why did you leave me here all alone?
Yeah, I
I
recognize that
searched
part. Yeah, sure.
the world over and thought I'd found true love, but you met another and you was gone." They would always blow a raspberry right there at the end.
Right.
In later years, Tapp's part would be played by a surprise guest star. And then after Archie Campbell passed away, they would really alternate who was there. You really haven't lived until you've seen Johnny Cash participate in this foolishness.
Okay.
There's some clips of it, and it's hilarious because Johnny Cash turns around. He's considerably a larger man than Archie Campbell, and you met another and you was gone. It's pretty impressive. Other recurring sketches might take place in a barber shop or on a front porch or while drinking moonshine and so forth, all reminiscent and perhaps just a wee bit stereotypical of rural life. Now, this is where I get impressed with Hee Haw. In addition to the country performers that I grew up listening to, like Buck Owens, Johnny Cash, from a production standpoint, the ease in which production ran, the cast would assemble in Nashville for a 2-week call. All the sketches would be shot in blocks. The cornfield here, the barbershop there. The entire season was completed in half a month.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, for a 45-minute TV show, that's pretty impressive. Then
And
you had
like
the time
20 and 20, how many episodes? 20, I mean,
well,
25 or 30?
It was in first run syndication after its third season. So
Uh-huh.
you're looking at, anywhere between 24 to 30 episodes back then in the late 60s.
Holy crap.
Plus the time it took to edit the sketches into different episodes. So you had a little bit of time on in the post-production area.
Right.
But still, a 2-week shoot. That's why Buck Owens could keep living in Bakersfield, California. That's why everybody could keep playing on the Opry. It was an efficient and organized system. Despite a decent showing from 1969 to 1971, earning as high as number 16, the 16th highest rated show on television, Hee Haw fell victim to the rural purge of CBS, which took out the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and Mayberry RFD in 1971. But this was not the end. Ellsworth and Pepia worked out a first-run syndication deal for Hee Haw. And syndication is one of those things that we throw around a lot, and I'm not sure it ever gets defined the way it really should. Basically, I know you're aware of this, but what syndication is basically it means that you don't need a network anymore. You can sell directly to the stations, and then the stations can fill in their production, their slots wherever they need to for their schedules.
Right.
That's why Star Trek Next Generation was so big in first run syndication. Some places it would air Monday nights at 10, other places it would air Thursday nights at 8, wherever a local station needed it. So they didn't need CBS or any other network. They could sell the program directly to the stations that could play Hee Haw during any time slot station owners preferred in their schedule. Hee Haw lasted in this arrangement until 1993. I
Oh,
did not
wow.
realize that show was on the air until the early 90s. It still pops up in reruns here and there.
Still with
That brought
with Buck Owen and I mean
in
and Rick.
reruns. Well,
Yeah.
Buck Owens left in '86, and so
Okay.
they would have I can't remember what exactly they did host wise, but yeah, you'll still see reruns pop up.
Wow.
TNN was running them as late as 97, 98. And I mean, if you buy the syndication package, you can show it whenever you want.
Right.
And
Right.
there's all the stations like MeTV and all these other things that could easily buy that package and air it.
Right.
You can air it 5 nights a week.
Unbelievable.
Now, Bryan, so far we've learned a lot about Hee Haw that we probably didn't know before. Probably that we maybe didn't want to know before if you're not into corny kind of humor. But all of this so far has been a setup, Bryan, because we're about to take a hard left turn.
Uh-oh.
Because at the end, we started in Canada. This story is kind of about a television program, but it's really about murder. This is going to become a true crime episode on a podcast that doesn't do true crime that often. It's, as my son says, it's all shits and giggles until someone giggles then shits. It's all funny until it turns to murder. This is our dark turn. You probably recall that I've mentioned a musician by the name of David Stringbean Aikman several times in the story.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to refer to him as Stringbean from here on out. Bryan, I've sent you an email with an image in it. Could you click on an email, open that sucker up, and tell me what you see and tell the audience what you see?
Email says, "Don't open this." Wow. So this must be String Bean. I'm not sure how tall String Bean is in real life. He's in a striped shirt and a little tiny little cowboy hat, but is very low waisted. Look like he has a his legs are the bottom one third of his body. So really, really long torso, but really, really skinny, holding a banjo.
Yes, that is all an optical illusion. It's trick he picked up when he was doing comedy as part of his musical act. He actually buckles his jeans just above his knees. He's wearing a men's nightshirt.
Okay.
So he wears it all the way down and then
Uh,
buckles his jeans just above, wears a short pair of jeans, buckles them just above his knees, like mid, I don't know,
right, right,
thigh or
right,
so.
right.
Gives them this illusion of having an incredibly long, disturbing looking torso. Um, and that was the comedy aspect of it. And you look at that and you see this really odd looking gentleman. I'm going to suggest this as the image for this episode. I don't know what you have planned, but David Aikman, and I'm going to call him String Bean, like I said, he was a banjo player. He was a great banjo player. In his long career, he played for and with some of the greats. He was born in Annville, Kentucky in 1915 and acquired his first banjo at the age of 12. He played local dances and earned a meager living. During the Great Depression, he signed on with the Civilian Conservation Corps, where, like thousands of other Americans, he built infrastructure such as roads, dams, um, public parks, state parks. He also planted a lot of trees. Aikman was tall, lanky, and rough-hewn, like so many laborers of the day. Musician Asa, also known as Ace, he's referred to as Ace sometimes, Asa Martin gave David his first break into professional musicianship. Aikman won a contest where Martin was the judge. He was so impressed that he invited Aikman there and then to join his band. But when it came time to introduce him, Martin completely forgot Aikman's name and instead just sputtered out, "Hey, String Bean, come here." And that's how he got his stage name. Many folks would forever known him simply as String Bean. While playing banjo professionally, String Bean also played a little semi-pro baseball, where he bumped into a guy by the name of Bill Monroe, who was one of the all-time great bluegrass legends. He played mandolin, was a singer, songwriter. Monroe was a fielder for another team, and he said, "Hey, I hear you're a good banjo player. Come join my band." So he played with Bill Monroe, which is just astonishing that he played for one of these guys. He performed on many of his recordings that are out there. And about this time, he really played up the String Bean image, dressing the way that you see in that image there. He added comedy to the act, and it eventually led him to performing on the Grand Ole Opry. In short succession, String Bean formed two relationships, In that very short amount of time that would last the rest of his life. Marriage to Estelle Stanfield in 1945, and a working relationship and a friendship. They would become best friends with Grandpa Jones, Lewis Jones, who was also would be on Hee Haw. But
Mm.
Grandpa Jones was a well-known banjo player as well. So they became good buddies and friends. The Aikmans and the Joneses actually bought adjoining properties near Ridgetop, Tennessee, some 20 miles outside of Nashville. Grandpa and String Bean would go hunting together. They'd have dinner together. The families would meet up all the time. String Bean and Estelle lived in a small cabin on their property. Despite their relative fame and wealth, String Bean and Estelle never saw the need for a bigger place. Didn't have kids, didn't need the space. It's just the two of them. String Bean had a few personal habits that some might consider odd. For shaving lotion, he used apple vinegar, which I've never heard of doing. For deodorant, he used rubbing alcohol. He raised and slaughtered pigs, smoking the meat, but he wouldn't eat any red meat or any kind of dairy whatsoever. No butter, no milk, nothing.
Hmm.
Anything that came from a cow, he would not eat. He hunted squirrels as another source of meat, and he would barter the surplus squirrel for his nicer clothing, his coats and his slacks that he would wear, because he didn't wear his String Bean outfit. That was his performing costume.
Right.
He foraged for wild herbs such as ginseng, which he would sell to local merchants. So while he was doing all this musician stuff, he was still living kind of a country life,
Right.
doing
Sure.
these things. String Bean carried large sums of money with him at all times, being one of those people of his generation who just didn't trust banks. There was always a couple of $1,000s hidden in his overalls, while Estelle carried hers in her bra. The Aikmans lived frugally, with one exception. Each year, the couple bought a brand new Cadillac. Estelle did all the driving because String Bean had never learned how.
Hmm.
Abe Lincoln would ride in the back, the breeze blowing back his hair, and he would clutch his stovepipe hat on his lap. During the 1960s, String Bean recorded a series of albums, and his reputation as one of the great old-style banjo players was cemented in popular music. And this would get into a long discussion of the different banjo styles, which I don't begin to understand, so I won't do it. But apparently he used an older style, and I hate to use these terms, of fingering and picking that I just don't have the musicianship or the understanding to describe. But given this short history we've just gone over, it should come as no surprise that String Bean was cast on Hee Haw as a regular performer in its very first season. In addition to the musical performances, he played the Scarecrow in the aforementioned Cornfield sketch, as well as the title character in String Bean's Letters from Home, where he would be reading a letter from someone back wherever he was from, and there'd be people assembled around him on the porch. And it would usually have some kind of Shaggy Dog punchline ending to whatever he was saying.
Right.
So, given the impressive block shooting schedule I mentioned earlier, Hee Haw tapings didn't interfere with live performances of the Grand Ole Opry. On the evening of November 10th, 1973, String Bean and Estelle were in Nashville for an Opry performance. String Bean was introduced on stage by the great Tex Ritter, who, of course, is dad to the late actor John Ritter.
John Ritter, yeah.
And he performed two songs on his first set, Y'all Come and Hillbilly Fever. Backstage, between sets, the Aikman and Jones families hammered out plans for the upcoming week. Grandpa and String Bean would leave for a hunting trip the next morning, while Ramona Jones and Estelle would have dinner sometime during that week. Steak dinner, a rare treat for Estelle, giving her husband's aversion to any kind of cow product. For his second set, String Bean performed two songs with guitarist Kurt Gibson, Going to the Grand Ole Opry to Make Myself a Name, and I think this is an instrumental, something called Hot Corn, Cold Corn. I'm suspecting that's an instrumental. Gibson ended the set by using his guitar to smack a baseball into the balcony seats of the auditorium and then limping off the stage. The two musicians then headed backstage to rehearse a number for the following week. That's not true. That was a Kirk Gibson bit I was doing. Kurt Gibson and Kirk. 88 Dodgers.
88 Dodgers, yeah. World Series, right. Game
Yeah.
one, right.
Yeah. But in this case, Kurt Gibson. See, the joke is that he hit it with his guitar and limped off this.
Got
it. The Aikmans headed home with Estelle behind the wheel as usual. They drove and listened to WSM, catching the last 30 minutes of the live Grand Ole Opry program. When they arrived at the cabin, they must have known that something wasn't quite right. String Bean took his .22 pistol to have a look in the cabin, while Estelle waited in the car. What happened next, we know from the testimony of Doug Brown, who, along with his cousin, John Brown, had spent time ransacking the Aikmans' cabin looking for String Bean's hidden money, which they didn't find. They had spent their time listening to the Opry themselves, waiting for String Bean's second set, the one with Kurt Gibson, to end. String Bean entered his cabin and stood in the darkness for a few moments. He finally realized he wasn't alone. He fired shots at Doug Brown, and John Brown returned fire on String Bean, killing him. Outside, Estelle had left the Cadillac and headed toward the cabin. Upon hearing the shots, she turned and ran back up the road. She fell to the ground and begged for mercy, because by then John Brown had caught up with her. He shot her twice in the back of the head, killing her instantly. Completely unrelated, the Edmund Fitzgerald would sink on Lake Superior, all 29 hands lost, exactly 2 years later, 10 November 1975. It was Grandpa Jones who found the Aikmans the next morning. Packed for the upcoming hunting trip, he'd driven over to gather String Bean for their trek to Virginia. He thought it odd that he couldn't spot smoke from the Aikmans' chimney. He discovered Estelle sprawled in the grass by the side of the road leading to the cabin. Inside, Jones found his old friend String Bean dead by the fireplace, the radio still on, tuned to WSM. He went home to call the police because the phone lines to the cabin had been cut. The Brown cousins had taken $250 off String Bean, but somehow missed the combined $5,700 the Aikmans had hidden on their persons. The murderers also fled with some firearms and, strangely, a chainsaw, leaving the scene in the Aikmans' Cadillac. When they were caught, of course, they each blamed the other. Grandpa Jones' testimony helped convict them. One of the firearms in their possession had been a gift from him to String Bean some years prior. Both cousins were found guilty, and as far as I can tell, both were punished with a pair of consecutive life sentences each. Some sources round this out to 198-year sentences. Doug Brown appealed several times, admitting to his part in the burglary, but maintaining that his cousin pulled the trigger in both String Bean and Estelle's murders. Doug Brown died in 2003 of natural causes while still in prison. John Brown was paroled in 2014 after serving 41 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Hee Haw and Grand Old Opry figures appeared at every parole hearing held for the cousins in protest of their potential release.
Hmm.
The writers and the cast of Hee Haw decided to honor String Bean's memory by not recasting the Scarecrow character in the cornfield sketch. A real Scarecrow was placed on set in his memory and appeared thereafter. The Aikmans' little cabin is now a museum dedicated to the Aikmans' lives together and to String Bean's musical career. And the final song String Bean sang, the one he did in rehearsal with Kurt Gibson after their set together, Lord, I'm Coming Home, was its title. Its lyrics, coming home, never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love, Lord, I'm coming home. And that is the
Wow.
brief story of Hee Haw and the murders of David and Estelle Aikman.
Very cool. Amazing story. I'd never heard any of that before, I don't think.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to look at Hee Haw and realize that went on behind the scenes in the early years. And
Yeah. 73? 73.
he was
Wow.
killed in 73. Yeah. Yep. In
Jeez,
the
yeah, I'd never heard that story before.
second year they were on the air in syndication. Sources
Wow,
for
yeah.
this were the All Music Guide for info on the careers of Buck Owens, Roy Clark, and David Aikman. DavidAikman.com, which has some great videos of String Bean performing. Peter Cooper, MSN.com's article, How the Murder of David String Bean Aikman Brought Fear to Nashville. That originally appeared in the Tennessean. Another great website about old-time country music called Hillbilly.com, which is really informative. I could have killed hours on there. I looked that up for more information on both String Bean and Kurt Gibson, the guitarist that he had the second and final set with, and Wikipedia for some basic dates, and also epguides.com as well to look up some of those Aylesworth and Pepiot TV shows if I could find them that they did when they were in Canada. So there we go.
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, interesting story.
Well,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you.
Whenever I think of banjo music, I think of all the funny and just bizarre but funny stuff that Steve Martin has done with his banjo playing. But I definitely have a huge respect for the complexity of that instrument because it's like orders of magnitude harder to learn how to play banjo over guitar or anything. And it's just a very, very complex instrument. It sounds great.
That's my understanding of it.
Yeah.
And if you do have a chance to see Steve Martin in concert with the Steep Canyon Rangers,
Mhm.
I saw them in Houston perform. It's a fantastic show.
Right.
It's great music, and I think that the pardon the pun, the corniness of Hee Haw kind of disguised the fact that they had some really magnificent musicians on that show,
Right.
talented individuals,
Mhm.
and folks who could. I mean, a lot of what they pulled, especially the Archie Campbell and Gordy Tapp stuff with "Where Are You Tonight," a lot of that comes from vaudeville, and I mean, a lot of that just two guys doing stuff on stage. That's where that comes from.
Right.
And you've got Grandpa Jones, you've got Roy Clark, Buck Owens, you've got String Bean, you've got just so many talented folks. Tennessee Ernie Ford was on the show as a regular for a while. I mean,
Mhm.
um, it really eclipses the fact that you had some amazingly talented people working on that show.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Very cool story. Thank you.
yep, you bet.
All right. Shifting gears. You ready?
Oh no, is this our
Mm-hmm.
curse word of the week?
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
Curse word. Ever heard of an ass pull before?
An asshole?
Mm-hmm. This comes to us from Urban Dictionary. My new favorite word. An ass pull is when an idea or something is saved by a last minute good idea. We were totally screwed, and then Morris had an ass pull of an idea that saved the day. An ass pull.
Okay. So literally I pulled that out. I pulled that one out
Right.
of my
Yeah.
ass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. The good old ass pull.
That word could go so many different directions. Well, not
Yes.
one direction really, out, but um good old fashioned ass pull.
Thank you, Urban Dictionary, for your contributions to modern life. All right. My turn. Here we go. You ready?
Yes.
So, referenced that I was going to tell the story way many, many, many moons ago, and finally getting around to it.
The story of Jesus.
It's the story of Jesus. Um, so here we go. Gideon Algernon Mantle was born in Lewes, Sussex, as the fifth-born child of Thomas Mantle, who was a shoemaker, and Sarah Austin. He was raised with two sisters and four brothers. And as a kid, he had a particular interest in geology. He liked to explore the quarries and caves in the area where he lived. He discovered ammonites and shells of sea urchins and fish bones, and liked studying the bones of dead animals. He would find the Mantle children couldn't study at the local grammar school because they were Methodist, and the free schools in the area were reserved exclusively for Anglican children. This is the same nonsense that impacted Mary Anning way back in the episode I was referencing, episode 24.
Right.
So Gideon Mantle secures an apprenticeship when he's 15 years old with a local surgeon named James Moore, and stays there for 5 years. His father, Thomas Mantle, dies in 1807, but leaves money for Gideon to study medicine. Gideon had already begun to teach himself human anatomy, and he ultimately detailed his newfound knowledge in a volume entitled The Anatomy of the Bones and the Circulation of Blood, which contains several dozen detailed drawings of skeletal features, both fetal and of adults. Mantle begins his formal medical education in London shortly thereafter, and gets his diploma as a member of the Royal College of Surgeons in 1811. And then just 4 days later, he gets a certificate from what's called the Lying In Charity for Married Women at Their Own Habitations, that allowed him to act in midwifery duties. So he's a young man. He has a booming medical practice. He sees as many as 50 patients a day, and this is in the wake of epidemics of smallpox and typhoid and cholera. And he also, sort of as a side hustle, he delivers between 200 and 300 babies a year. But even with all of this going on, he still finds time to go digging and enjoys geology and enjoys looking for fossils. In 1816, he marries a woman named Mary Ann Woodhouse. She's the 20-year-old daughter of one of his former patients who had just died 3 weeks earlier. Way to score on someone who's grieving there, Gideon. Since she was not yet 21 and still technically a minor under English law, she had to get permission from her mother to marry and get a special license to do so. She got consent, and they married on May 4th of 1816 at St. Marylebone Church. And that year, he purchased his own medical practice and takes up an appointment at the Royal Artillery Hospital in Ringmer. Inspired by Mary Anning, they're contemporary. Inspired by Mary Anning's discovery down at Lyme Regis on the southern coast of a fossilized animal that sort of resembles a huge crocodile that is later identified as an ichthyosaur. He becomes much more interested in plants and animals and fossils and doing digging of his own. By 1820, he's about 30. He starts to find very large bones near where he lives at Cuckfield. Then in 1822, shortly before finishing his first book, a piece called "The Fossils of South Downs," his wife Mary she's out for a walk, and she finds several large teeth. Thinking they are fossils, and knowing her husband's interest in fossils, she takes them to him. In 1821, Mantle planned his next book on the geology of Sussex. It was an immediate success. He had a couple hundred subscribers, including King George IV. The king wrote to Gideon saying, "His Majesty is pleased to command that his name should be placed at the head of the subscription list for 4 copies." It's unknown how the monarch heard of Gideon Mantle's work, but Mantle's response is certainly known. He's galvanized by this support and encouraged, and Mantle takes these teeth that his wife has found and starts passing them around to other scientists. But they're kind of dismissed. Other scientists think, well, these are fish teeth. These are nothing special, or they're teeth from a mammal from a more recent period of time. There's the French anatomist Georges Cuvier says they are the teeth of a rhinoceros. He doesn't really explain why they'd be rhino teeth, because rather famously, rhinos don't live in Great Britain. So not exactly sure why he'd offer that up.
Well, not anymore.
Right. Well, still. But Mantle is still convinced that the teeth were from the Mesozoic era, and recognized that they were extremely similar to those of the iguana, but they were 20 times larger. And he
Holy
surmised,
shit.
he surmised that the owner of these teeth had to have been about 60 feet in length. And there's much debate, and they go back and forth and back and forth. But it's later pretty clearly they figured out in 1825 that Gideon Mantle is correct. He originally calls this animal the Iguanosaurus, and later, kind of for clerical genus and philo reasons, renamed Iguanodon is the name of this
okay.
This animal. 1833, Mantle relocates to Brighton, but his medical practice is suffering. He's nearly rendered destitute, but for the town's council, which transforms his house into a museum, he starts giving lectures on geology. The museum in Brighton starts to fail because Mantle starts waiving the entrance fee, because it's kind of deemed to be not gentlemanly to be charging access to your own home. So he's essentially financially destitute because he doesn't really want to be a doctor anymore, apparently. And he offers to sell the entire collection, his entire collection of fossils now, to the British Museum in 1838 for £5,000. Later accepts a counteroffer of £4,000, and then moves to Clapham Common in South London, where he keeps working as a doctor. 1839, Mary leaves her husband because of all the stress and all the money stress. And that same year, Gideon's son Walter emigrates to New Zealand. Later on, starts getting into geology and digging on his own, and sends his father some important fossils from New Zealand. And Gideon also loses a daughter. His daughter Hannah dies in 1840. So I'm going to send you the email I sent you as well. You can go ahead and open now, and I will keep reading. In South London, there is a place called Crystal Palace and Crystal Palace Park. The Crystal Palace itself had been the host of the 1851 World Exhibition. And then I believe they're actually, toward the end of the exhibition, they're having some sort of storm or something. I think most of the original Crystal Palace had collapsed or been pretty seriously damaged or destroyed, but that had been re-erected in its current location, along with a number of concrete sculptures of dinosaurs, or at least dinosaurs as they knew them at the time. The email I sent you has a picture of the Crystal Palace, which is a huge freaking structure made of glass with sort of steel framing. And then some of the sculptures of these dinosaurs they're impressive, but they're sort of curiously and comically incorrect. One has a thumb bone depicted as its nose because at the time they didn't know this bone was the thumb. And the iguanodon statue that's in Crystal Palace Park to this day is depicted as being on all fours, even though Mantle was able to demonstrate that, as with the T-Rex, this animal was actually bipedal. So on New Year's Eve, 1853, there is a gathering of 21 prominent scientists for a dinner. And not only are they there at the huge, probably 8-story Crystal Palace, they are actually having a meal inside the unfinished iguanodon. But Gideon Mantle is not there. At the head of the table.
I beg your pardon?
Pardon me?
Dinner inside the iguanodon?
Yeah. No, not the one there's another statue of a frame of iguanodon that's inside the Crystal Palace that's not concrete. Gideon Mantle is not there for this dinner. At the head of the table is another paleontologist, a man named Richard Owen. Mantle had died just 6 weeks prior. So in the email I sent you, there's a picture there of Richard Owen. Just give me a quick take on what you think of that picture.
Well, so this is Richard Owen. This is not Mantle. This is Richard Owen.
Correct.
He looks like he's about to travel across some marshes with some hobbits. He's got a very Gollum vibe to him. He looks kind of
evil.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like he also might play, if not Scrooge, maybe Marley's ghost in a production of Christmas Carol.
Yeah, he looks a lot like Ebenezer Scrooge.
He does, yeah.
Or Darth Vader when Darth Vader's mask is taken away at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. A very unfortunate look to this guy.
Yeah, the hair's not right. He's definitely not smiling. And he does look like he's about to eat a couple of fat hobbitses.
Yeah, very much the vibe. So in the book, A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson, Bryson writes, quote, by this time, Richard Owen had several productive years of making Gideon Mantle's life hell, unquote. So Owen had grown up in the north of England and also trained as a doctor. He was known to be very driven, but he was cantankerous. He was a very gifted anatomist, but very devoted to his studies. He was known to occasionally borrow limbs, organs, and other body parts from from cadavers, where it's part of his medical practice, and throw them, just walk out with them so he could dissect them at his leisure at home. On one occasion, he had swiped the head of a dead African sailor, and he'd slipped on a wet cobblestone on his walk home. The head bounced away from him and through the open door of a home where it landed in the front parlor. Presumably, the homeowner was a little surprised, to see a head roll into his front parlor, and then a young man walk in, grab the head by its hair, and then walk out again without saying anything. He was hired in 1825 by the Royal College of Surgeons to organize their huge but completely disordered collection of medical specimens. He was such a gifted anatomist that the London Zoological Society gave him the right of first refusal whenever an animal in on its at its site died. His wife was probably very disturbed on the day when she came home and she found a dead rhino in their front hall.
Oh.
He wrote a total he wrote a total of 600 anatomical papers. He was the first to write a formal epitaph for the dodo bird. While he agreed that evolution took place, he disagreed with Darwin on some aspects of it, thought it was much more complex than the way Darwin had sort of portrayed it in On the Origin of Species. But he did help dissect several of the samples that Darwin brought home on the Beagle. Charles Darwin was said that Richard Owen was the only person Charles Darwin was known to openly hate. But Richard Owen did coin the term dinosauria. He's the one that came up with that word, even though it was not terribly accurate. Many dinosaurs are shy herbivores, no bigger than a border collie, and actually they're not even lizards at all. But he did coin the term, and it's still the term that's being used, even though it's not right. Also, from A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson, just adding this in here because it was just a perfect take on Richard Owen. Quote, Owen was not an attractive person in appearance or in temperament. A photograph from his late middle years shows him as gaunt and sinister, like the face in a Victorian melodrama, with long, lank hair and bulging eyes, a face to frighten babies. In manner, in manner, he was cold and imperious, and he was without scruple in the furtherance of his ambitions. So I believe it's been mentioned here on more than one occasion that you have a history in academia, and if I wanted to in 2024 steal your dissertation, I'm sure I could go online. I could probably find a copy of it, and I could probably make a reasonably decent copy of it and make it appear as though I had written it. But with 21st century technology and the systems that are in place today, it would be clear more or less immediately that I had plagiarized it. But at this time, this point in time, the early part of the 19th century, there are no systems for this. As gifted as Richard Owen was in this field, he's definitely an egomaniac. He was somewhat lazy, and he was repeatedly described as dishonest and cantankerous, and he had no problem stealing other people's findings and passing them off as his own. He would routinely write to other societies royal across Europe, because he was a member of all of them, and encourage them not to publish various papers. And in the case of Gideon Mantles, routinely took credit for stuff that Gideon Mantle had already been known to have found. Some are Mantles, but he did this to other scientists as well. If you were an upstart new paleontologist or anthropologist, he would go out of his way to undermine your credibility, and did this mostly out of spite. Uh, while Gideon Mantle supported and on a couple occasions worked with Mary Anning, Owen gave her a terrible price for one of her ichthyosaurs, her best known find, and at one point even tried to claim he had been the one to find it. So happily, Owen's place as a plagiarist is known, and proper credit has been given. In 1841, Gideon Mantle was crossing Clapham Common. He fell from a carriage and was caught in the reins, and then was dragged by panicked horses some distance. He would never recover from the injury. He was bent and crippled and in constant pain because of scoliosis, but he continued to work with fossilized reptiles. He published a number of scientific books and papers. He moved to Pimlico in 1844 and began taking opium as a painkiller in 1845. On 10th of November 1852, Mantle took an overdose of opium, lapsed into a coma, and died. His postmortem showed that he had been suffering from severe lumbar scoliosis, and a section of Mantle's spine was removed, preserved, and stored on a shelf at the Royal College of Surgeons of England and placed in the care of Sir Richard Owen.
Good Lord.
Literally adding insult to injury. Nevertheless, at the time of his death, Mantle is credited with discovering 4 of the 5 genera of dinosaurs known at the time. And in 2000, to commemorate Mantle's discovery, there actually is a monument erected on the site where those iguanodon teeth were found in 1822.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. I came across the story forever ago, and in the context of Mary Anning and some of the other scientists I've discussed, I find it incredibly amusing that at the time of typhoid and all the insanity and I don't know how anyone would have time to be this spiteful and this awful to other human beings. Just makes me laugh. It seems like this guy's just a genuinely terrible human being, but nevertheless, he thrived.
Someone else here reminds me of, it looks like he went on later to buy the Dallas Cowboys. He looks kind of like him.
Yeah, he does actually. Yeah.
That's an incredible story, Brian. I've never heard of Gideon Algernon Mantle. And I guess I need to point out that his death on 10 November had nothing to do with the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald or the murders of Stringbean and his wife.
Right.
And I think this is the longest time between sequels too. If this is kind of a sequel to Mary Anning, it's quite the haul, man.
75 episodes, yeah.
Yeah. That is so cool. But, this guy, what happened to Dickhead? When did he die? He probably lived a long life. I mean, a guy looks older than dirt in this picture, so.
Lived to be well into his 80s. There are pictures of him with his children and his grandchildren who appear to be loving and doting. He was well to do. I mean, so his own children weren't scared of him, I judge, but his reputation for stealing other people's work and just being a scumbag, was known during his lifetime. So he was pretty roundly discredited while he was still alive. So,
I like how you blew past they lived in Cuckfield. That was pretty funny. And then do you know what Buck Owens' music establishment in Bakersfield is named?
No.
Crystal Palace. So there we go. There's another connection between How is Hee Haw related to
the English Premier Football team is named after Buck? Oh, wow, that is so weird.
It's not all about Hee Haw.
The Hee Haw conspiracy. That'll be the next thing that takes over.
Richard Owen, Buck Owens. Wait a minute, there might be something there. That's a fascinating story, Brian. Yet another guy who's just shafted by history out of just this expensive. Edison may have done similar stuff. Lee DeForest certainly did. When it came time for radio and television, Lee DeForest stole tons of stuff from various people.
Let's see if I can get away with this. And the fact that a portion of Mantle's spine winds up on Owen's desk, like, oh my God.
And that he played with it constantly. Gave it to his grandkids to play. Don't
guess who this is.
Yeah.
Remember Uncle Gideon? Here he is.
Kids playing with it and probably used it as a pipe tamponer or something gross. Just, horrible human.
Ugh.
Well, thank you, Brian. That was fascinating.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Another one in the books, I think. 102. Done.
Yeah, and again, two seemingly unrelated topics, which are connected, at least in my mind. So that's where it counts.
Right. If nowhere else. Thanks for listening, folks. Yeah, we appreciate it. Please give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever. Check us out, patreon.com/Dream Idiots. You can sign up there for free. If you want to pay to the Church of Dream Idiots and give us money too, you can do that too. But it's not required to get our audio content. Drop us a line at dreamidiots.podcast@gmail and Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots. We appreciate you hanging out there and listening to us and liking and sharing and subscribing. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and sorry for the whiffing on the Abraham Lincoln holding his stovepipe hat joke in his lap. I even practiced that several times, but I should have written that differently.
Muffed it.
I just anyway. All right. Be good to each other.
Bye.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong.
Mhm.
Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.